All right. Hello, and welcome back to the Thought Cloud podcast. Our goal with this conversation is to uncover a hidden gem that can inspire others along their academic journey. Today, we are fortunate to have the wonderful Dr. Clarice Aiello. Dr. Aiello is a quantum engineer interested in how quantum physics informs biology at the nanoscale, and she has a remarkable academic path. She started her undergraduate studies at the University of Sao Paolo, then graduated from Ecole Polytechnique in Paris with a Diplome d'Ingénieur. She obtained her Master's of Philosophy in Physics from the University of Cambridge for her work with quantum dots and photonic structures. After, she went on to complete her PhD in electrical engineering from MIT, where she gained experience building a research lab from scratch and studied ways to control at room temperature the spin qubit of a nitrogen-vacancy center in diamond in order to implement quantum computing and metrology protocols. She held postdoctoral appointments at both UC Berkeley for chemistry and at Stanford for bioengineering, and she is now at UCLA, where she serves as the principal investigator at the Quantum Biology Tech Lab, Qubit Lab, and is a member of the Center for Quantum Science and Engineering, as well as an assistant professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. She has a lot to share with us. So, Dr. Aiello, thank you so much for coming on today. We're super excited to jump into it with you.
Hello there. And I think that, if I may, I think that it's already clear that people usually don't tell about their people think when they talk to scientists that their careers are like linear and stuff. And you have just exemplified by reading where I've been to that my career has made turns, and I think it's important that we start this conversation by saying that sometimes where you think you're going to end is not necessarily where you end up, and that it's perfectly normal. That
I love it. I love it. Well, let's jump into that. So where did you think you were going initially? And let's talk about how you ended up where you are now. So where did it all start for you?
Yeah, so everything starts with my accent, right? So I'm from Brazil. I was born and raised in Brazil, and the first thing that happened was that I did not get into journalism school. So yeah, here's the story. I did not grow up to be an engineer, a physicist, in the sense that I'm an only child. I was always the quiet person. I was always reading, writing, and I wanted to go to journalism school. And then I was like, yeah, and maybe like if that doesn't work out, I'll become something else. So when I needed to start applying for schools, I applied for an engineering school. That was really my safe bet, and a journalism school that I didn't get into.
Oh my
I
goodness.
ended up in an engineering school. And 2 years into that, there was a new program of student exchange with the school in France. Again, super new. And then I was actually the first cohort to go to France, to the Ecole Polytechnique. I ended my graduation there. Then I went to the UK with the hope of doing a PhD in the UK. Didn't like the weather because it was too cold, too cloudy for me. And then I ended up in another cloudy place in Boston, Massachusetts for 7 more years. And yeah, and another important thing is that after I finished my PhD, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And I actually spent 1 year teaching at my department at MIT, being a lecturer, which was a super nice experience. And in the end, I started applying for postdoctoral positions, which is what you can do after you get your PhD. You can do research for professors. And sort of by chance, I ended up in a chemistry lab. And again, I didn't have any particular experience with chemistry. And now I have to tell you a little bit about my PhD. So during my PhD, I worked with quantum sensors. So I'm trained as a quantum engineer, which means that I build instruments to study and control things that are so small and so well protected from their environment, they're better described by the laws of quantum mechanics as opposed to the laws of classical mechanics that rule everything big around us. So I built instruments to study and control quantum objects. You can prove that if you use a quantum object as a sensor, your measurement is improved. In other words, the sensor quantumness enhances the measurement. This is the field of quantum sensing. So during my PhD, I worked to study and control a particular technological quantum sensor that was, for example, a very good magnetic field sensor in the material diamond that some of you have in your jewelry. After that, I didn't know what to do. I ended up for my postdoc in a chemistry postdoc. And I was doing something completely different. I was working on a chip-based imaging platform for chemical compounds. And we wanted to, I assure you it will all make sense in a second, like where I'm going with this. So we wanted to image photosynthetic pigments in plant samples, okay? And this photosynthetic pigment is called chlorophyll. But the imaging platform wasn't really working. And then I started looking for alternative samples that I could use to troubleshoot what happened, what is happening. I wasn't sure if we were having issues with the chip-based imaging sensor or with the sample, the chlorophyll sample that we had. So by chance, I came across a potential sample to use that consisted of this protein called cryptochrome, again, by chance. And I was planning to use the sample to again, troubleshoot what we were doing. And as I started reading more about this protein, this sample called cryptochrome, I realized that it seemed to be working in many, many ways, pretty much like the technological quantum sensor that I was working with during my PhD studies, right? Mm-hmm. So in the sense that when it was interacting with its environment, cryptochrome was behaving as a bona fide quantum sensor, like inside a test tube.
Wow.
And again, all of this happened more or less by chance, right? How many chance things I've told you. So I didn't get into journalism school. Then I was the first cohort to go to France because it was just a program that had just started. Then I didn't like England because it was too cold. I didn't know what to do after my PhD. I ended up in this chemistry stuff and by chance looking at this weird sample that was behaving as a bona fide quantum system. And that's how, that's all the things that needed to be brought together to for me to be where I am. So given those similarities, I started exploring ways at which nature might be using quantum mechanics to function.
Wow.
This is a field of quantum biology, right? And right now at UCLA, what we're doing is developing experiments that really look like the experiment that I had built during my PhD to study and control those technological materials, right? But instead of those experiments trying to study and control those technological materials, we study quantum objects that live inside proteins, inside living things.
Gotcha. And I want to dig more into what you're doing at the Qubit Lab because it is so fascinating what you've got there. And before we jump into that, I want to ask, why did you decide academic was the route? I mean, for someone as decorated as you with degrees, you going into the industry would, that seems like, wow, she would have gotten a great job, but you really were passionate about learning, or what was it that kept you digging into it deeper?
It was mainly it was mainly laziness, I think, in that I have never, again, okay, two things. First of all, thankfully, this has changed. But when I was an undergrad, a grad student, you could not do quantum research out of a lab, right? Right now, we have this booming, marvelous quantum industry. And now you can go to industry and keep on playing with your lasers, with your quantum hardware, right? But when I was doing my PhD, this was not the case. If you wanted to do quantum research, you needed to continue in academia. And I wanted to continue doing quantum research. That's one. The second one, again, it was laziness in the sense that it was just the easiest path, the path of least resistance. I'm not proud of that. No way. Third, and that's sort of important, I hadn't realized something, and this is actually very acute with me, in me right now. I have just, I'm almost, again, almost ashamed to say that it took me this long to realize that. But until very recently, I thought that academia had the monopoly of basic knowledge, of the development of basic knowledge. And that is completely false, in that there's a lot of very beautiful research being done by industry. And I feel ashamed that I never took the time to explore the type of work that could be done by industry, by other sorts of structures, right?
Mm.
Today, I'm convinced that you can do basic research, which is what I like, in academia, outside academia, and there are so many different ways of funding science that are now popping up, right? Besides actually just academia and industry, there are many other ways of funding science, and I, for one, am very eager to start learning more about those things.
Definitely. What are some of those ways, if you don't mind touching on just a couple?
Yeah. So, for example, there is something called it's all of this is again very new. It's called a focused research organization. It's some big rich people with some pot of money that says, let me fund a not-for-profit startup for a couple of years with the goal of advancing some small part of a research problem in a very focused way. Okay? Those things are temporary. They're not for profit and they're temporary. And the goal of that is to move a very specific needle, right? Uh, for example, like let's move the needle on this particular problem, so that maybe in 5 to 10 years there can be an industry of that, or maybe there can be academic endeavors on that. So this is one way of funding science. Another very interesting way of funding science that is booming now is the whole decentralized science movement, that people are now putting up projects online that can be funded bit by bit, actually by Bitcoin and things like this, right? So this is another way of doing science. So there's so much to explore. And I am very fortunate that I am now more attuned more tuned to those different ways of doing science, of funding science. And I think this is positive. This is positive because there's so much money to go around. And I mean, this is a good thing for scientists in general.
Definitely. So in terms of choosing a particular route for how you want to pursue that pure knowledge, how do you suggest that those looking to get into this space, approach it? Just learn as much as they can? Is that sort of what your take is?
In which sense? You mean in which part of it are you curious
In the
about?
sense of choosing between, academia from a university offering or choosing from the decentralized approach, like, how would you suggest someone to navigate those waters?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm it can be super helpful here, because it has taken me a lot of time to realize those things were there, right? Um, I actually don't know if I have any actionable advice. Academia is by far the path of least resistance for most people. Um, however, I know that, I mean, opening startups now are getting, it's something that is getting easier and easier, especially if you do not, if you're more on the theory side, right? If you don't have like lab requirements and so forth. So I actually don't know how to explore this whole ecosystem. I think that one thing to keep in mind is that this ecosystem exists, right? And that if some structure does not fit what you want to do, just be aware that there might be other ways of doing this, of exploring things, of exploring science fields, of exploring science funding. And yeah, I think that
Be aware.
might be aware. And
Yeah.
yeah, totally. I mean, be curious on about your science, right? Keep on curious. And I really think that, you know, the science of the century is going to be, the important science of the century is going to involve many different fields. I think interdisciplinarity is going to be more and more relevant for science and for enabling discoveries, right? So I also tell people to keep curious and try to connect things that you like, right? And that you're familiar with, even if nobody has thought of potential connections.
Right. No, that's great advice. That's great advice. And I think that's actually a perfect segue for us to go into your involvement at the Qubit Lab, because it is very interdisciplinary. And of the talks that I've heard you speak on, that's one of the big, you know, I mean, obstacle is not the right word, but big, initiatives and pushes that you need to make in order to take this work to the level you want to take it to. So talk to us about the opportunity and how did it arise? Obviously, you became interested in cryptochrome, but when did you get this opportunity to be the principal investigator of this lab, and how was that setting everything up?
Well, it was hard. So I started my lab at UCLA 2 months before the pandemic hit, which is hard when you're in the business of building experiments, right? And you cannot be in the lab, you cannot order your stuff. It was crazy. For Christ's sake, we are so delayed, but that's fine. We're still suffering the pandemic. Oh, and I'm so happy um because of the pandemic, visas have been delayed. So uh, some people in my lab, it took them more than 6 months to get a visa. Like 2 weeks ago, the very last person that we were waiting for is actually here. So
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
thank you. I mean, I have been sleeping so much better since then, because yeah. Anyway, it was crazy. It's too crazy. But here's what we do, if I may, and
Yeah.
let me explain a little bit about like the science and the experiments that we want to build. So I got to this because I realized, and there's no controversy here, I realized that there were things within proteins that were behaving as bona fide quantum sensors, right? And let me explain what exactly I mean by that. So it's been known for many decades in chemistry that there are some chemical reactions that depend on the quantum property of spin. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about spin.
Mhm.
So Spin is a fundamental quantum property that is as fundamental as mass and charge. For example, electrons have spin, atomic nuclei have spin, and in the same way that, say, charge, if you think about charge, charge is really a construct. Charge is the name of the property that we use to describe how, say, electrons interact with electric fields, right? Electrons have a certain negative charge, but there are things that have like positive charge. And positive and negative charge have to do with different ways that an object, an electron, say, can interact with electric fields. The more or less corresponding property for magnetic fields is spin. Okay, spins tell us how objects interact with magnetic fields. And in the same way that charge can be positive or negative, spins are usually called, they are represented by an arrow, and then you say arrow up or arrow down, spin up or spin down. Again, just an abstraction that tells us different ways of an electron interacting with the magnetic field. So it's known in basic chemistry that there are certain chemical reactions that depend on electron spins. And here's how this works. There's a chemical reaction happening, and at some point, the chemical reaction comes to a crossroads. At that point, the chemical reaction actively looks for a certain spin state of an electron. If the spin is up, the chemical reaction continues to one branch. If the spin is down, the chemical reaction continues to another branch. Importantly, those two branches yield products that are macroscopically different. So an electron having a quantum property of spin up or a quantum property of spin down can have macroscopically different
outcomes,
outcomes
right,
of this chemical reaction. The second thing you need to know is that a brief interaction of the electron spin of interest with the magnetic field when this chemical reaction comes to this crossroads might actually influence if the spin is up or down. And this interaction with the magnetic field is exactly the same type of interactions that quantum sensors use in order to interact with, say, fields that they in the end measure. Okay. So a magnetic field interacting with this electron spin can actually alter if the spin up chemical path is taken or the spin down path is taken. So an interaction with a magnetic field might actually alter the outcomes of the chemical reaction. So this is known in test tube chemistry, no doubt. And chemists and quantum physicists have just not realized they've been talking about the same thing. It's just quantum sensing. It's exactly the same thing. No controversy there. Now, here's where the biology enters, right? Because in the end, we're talking about quantum bio. Here's how biology got dragged into this whole discussion. Biology got dragged into this whole chemical discussion because of birds. Again, I don't care about birds, but birds were like very important for bringing this to the conversation. So when birds, butterflies, and turtles, when they migrate, right, there's no doubt that at least as a partial cue that they're using the magnetic field of the Earth to navigate. And the magnetic field of the Earth is smaller than the magnetic field that you sense when you put your cell phone close to your face, which is crazy, right?
Right.
There's some very sensitive sensing going on there. Right now, when you probe birds behaviorally, right, when you mess up with magnetic fields close by, what happens is that they respond to magnetic fields in a way that is consistent with a spin-dependent chemical reaction driving the whole thing under the hood.
Gotcha. Similar to the paths you were talking about earlier. This is now, these paths are affecting the actual bird.
Yes, exactly, right? And that's super crazy. So there's evidence from the chemistry, and there's evidence with like whole birds. And birds brought this to the conversation. But right now, there are many, many other chemical reactions that depend on spin that might be driving physiology according to those low-tech experiments in a way that is consistent with the spin model under the hood. Again, it goes way beyond bird. It has to do with like regeneration of DNA, stem cell proliferation, the production of reactive oxygen species, how much cells do respiration, how much cells do glycolysis. It's like this whole plethora of phenomena that seems to be depending on magnetic fields in a way that is consistent with a spin-dependent chemical reaction happening under the hood.
Wow.
So the idea is, like, if this is true, that those things are being altered by a chemical phenomenon, a spin-dependent chemical phenomenon, can we learn exactly which magnetic field is the sweet spot to alter each particular chemical reaction so that we can start actuating on biology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's evidence from test tube chemistry and evidence from like big organisms or plates of cells. Can we do instead a quantum-inspired experiment where we treat those electron spins inside, say, proteins inside single cells as if they were, because they are bona fide quantum sensors? That you apply the whole machinery that was developed to study, say, quantum computing and quantum sensing, and try to control those spins in the way that you would control a technological quantum sensor, right? And start learning how to very deterministically drive those chemical processes, say, for therapeutics.
Right.
So
wow.
Where I want to be like in 30 years is like you have your cell phone, you say, well, I need help with wound healing. And then you get your app, you click there, and then your cell phone produces like the particular magnetic field strength and frequency that you need to do wound healing.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, this is absolutely science fiction right now. That doesn't exist, right?
Right.
But in order to get there, we need about like decades of research with big experiments in optical tables, experiments that really look like quantum computing experiments, where we can get this deterministic code book that we can understand mechanistically using the spins, right? Exactly how the spins are responding to each magnetic field. So the end goal technology is already achievable, but we need experiments where we can at the same time investigate and measure quantum mechanical degrees of freedom, say inside a cell, and check how a certain spin preparation influences some particular physiological outcome. So here's the type of experiment that we're trying to develop here.
Wow, that is unbelievable. That is absolutely that. I mean, and I know you said 30 years down the road, maybe, give or take whatever, but that is just so cool to be thinking about that. I can see why you're so excited about that in and of itself. I mean, one of my questions is, why do you think others should be most excited about this work? But that is unbelievable, and really understanding these intricate processes, that's really neat. So here's a question for you on that note. And I know our time's running out. We're going to have to take a quick little break here shortly. But, melatonin, for example, is like a drug that people use, and, it puts you to sleep. But then it sort of affects your sleep. And, it's not necessarily, it doesn't always have the best long-term effects is what they're starting to see. So when we get down to this level, what are those errors that we could run into as we're starting to employ some of these magnetic fields onto these cells and their processes? Like what kind of issues do you see that we could run into, and what would we have to then prevent?
It's funny that we didn't, the audience, we didn't make this on purpose, but it's funny that you mentioned melatonin. I'll get to the melatonin in a second. Actually, there's very rich spin physics in. Let me start with the melatonin, right? So, for example, it's not proven that it's melatonin, but I think my bet is that what I'm going to describe has to do with melatonin. So, I have a friend who's a bona fide precision measurement physicist.
Mm-hmm.
And what he does is he builds hypomagnetic chambers. That is, he builds chambers that are very well shielded from magnetic fields, and then he shoves like quantum experiments inside. He started to hear about those like, quantum mechanics and biology, saying magnetic fields. So he grew tadpoles, like frog embryos, inside those hypomagnetic chambers under two conditions. Under one condition, he actually mimicked the magnetic field of the Earth. The tadpoles were okay. And in the other condition, like with no magnetic field. So basically, magnetic field of the Earth is about 50 microtesla. His chamber noise level was about 1 nanotesla, so very tiny. About a third of the tadpoles under this nanotesla field were malformed. So let's see if we understand here. We're not even putting a magnetic field, we're just taking out the tiny magnetic field of the Earth and we're creating havoc in cellular processes. Because the magnetic field that we're taking out is so tiny, right? Nobody really thinks that it has to do with some permanent magnet chunk inside the tadpoles, right? And actually, apparently the thing that gives the tadpoles their colors, like the black colors, is melatonin. And there's very rich physics in melatonin. So I think that what's happening now is like some weird stuff having to do with spins in melatonin. But think about the type of implications that this can have, right? So, I mean, magnetic fields might be more important for life than we realize. For example, if you want to go to Mars, right? What's the magnetic field in Mars? It's actually weaker than the magnetic field of the Earth. Can we reproduce in Mars? Can we grow lettuce in Mars? Right? It's super important. And people have grown cells under hypomagnetic field conditions and they see differences in gene expression, differences in epigenetic markers. It's crazy.
Unbelievable. So yeah, I guess I'm monitoring that going forward. We'll just have to create somewhat of what quasi environments or as close to those environments as we can.
Or understand exactly what small magnetic fields are happening. For reasons that I didn't have time to explain, those chemical reactions that depend on spin, they are only sensitive to small magnetic fields on the order of the Earth, on the order of your cell phone. This means that if you put the magnetosensitive proteins inside a big magnetic resonance machine, which has like a huge magnetic field, that big magnetic field won't alter the pathway, the chemical pathways. This type of chemical reactions is the stuff that gets changed by weak magnetic fields, which is the beauty of the stuff, right? Because it doesn't take a lot of strength for you to actuate, but it's also to some extent like dangerous, right? We really do need to understand what like low-level emitting devices are doing to us.
No, definitely. Gosh, I mean, I want to get away from my cell phone and computer now.
No. That's not what I'm saying, right? I don't want to create panic or
No, yeah.
I'm just saying that it needs to be researched. It definitely needs to be researched. It might well be that things produced by our cell phones and computers, they're not affecting because only particular fields affect certain chemical reactions. Maybe we got lucky, and right, but I think we should be looking at those things at the nanoscale. That's like electromagnetics in biology.
All right. So we're back. We were just talking about the need to study these fields more, to see how they're affecting us, to see what we can do with them, to see what we can prevent, et cetera, and the possibilities there are. So super exciting. I'm really happy to hear you speak on what you've been able to do and what you're, hoping to accomplish with your team. And the last couple of questions I have about the Qubit Lab are, how do you feel that you have most benefited from being involved in this lab, whether that's from the science itself or the operations side and the team building side? And the other question is, what do you think the biggest impact that the Qubit Lab has on its team members?
Wow, those are big questions.
Yeah.
Since I started here, I have been spending an inordinate amount of time just recruiting people. And I think finding the right people for such an endeavor is extremely important, right? So I'm actually super proud of my team who decided to join a lab during a pandemic, a starting lab during a pandemic on a field that is sometimes misunderstood, right? There's still a lot of baggage related to quantum bio. And actually, if you Google quantum biology, hit number 13 in my browser is like some weird like new age quantum healing and stuff. So it's there's all sorts of baggage
I
that
know what you're talking
yeah.
about. I know what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. I told someone I like quantum information once, and they said, "Oh my gosh, so do I." And it was completely different, completely different kind. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's funny.
Right, and it's again, it's part of my job to also to educate people about quantum quantum bio. That what we're trying to do here is like trying to deterministically tweak those endogenous quantum mechanical degrees of freedom in biology. There's no mystery in that. The technology that I described to you, like an app in your phone, that doesn't exist yet, but there's nothing magical about it. Right?
Mm.
So I am extraordinarily proud of my team for supporting the vision. They know where we want to get. I don't think there's any group in the world trying to do such high-tech quantum experiments as we're trying. And it's quite cool because in my lab, we have people with a chemistry background, with an engineering background, with a physics background. We don't have anyone with a bio background yet, but we will. And we all sort of support each other, right? We're all comfortable with being uncomfortable. We're all learning from each other because that's how interdisciplinary science needs to be, right?
Definitely.
And this does not pertain to our work, but it's very dear to me that we run an inclusive group where everyone feels respected, and I take the time to talk to my people about inclusion, diversity, and mental health. Academia sometimes can be very cruel,
Mm.
right? And I run things a little bit differently in my group to make it a little bit more welcoming. So for example, one of the things that I want to mention is that sometimes I didn't mention this when you mentioned why did you stay in academia. Actually, it's a privilege to be able to stay in academia, right? Not everyone can do a PhD. You don't get a lot of money. Though when you're a PhD student, right? Like you could probably not support a family on a PhD student salary. So going to grad school, continuing in academia is a privilege. Some people need to get out and go to industry because you make more money. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it is a privilege. I think you've said it best, and to be able to spend your time focusing on these things that are so far in the future, yet you're working the day to make those impacts. I think that that is so admirable, and you are so lucky to be doing that. And
And
uh,
privilege, right?
yeah,
I don't have like caretaking responsibilities. If I had caretaking responsibility, maybe I would. Yeah, yeah. But then there's all sorts of factors.
definitely, definitely. Well, that is so exciting, and it was so great for you to be able to shed light on this path, to hear your excitement develop throughout the years, and to see what you're now working on and hope to accomplish. I'm so excited for you. You got a new number one fan, so we're gonna close this out. We're gonna close this out now with our rapid fire round. So, just
Okay,
a
I'm
couple of
ready.
questions.
I'm ready. Okay.
Okay. First one, what is the most stressful part of being a full-time academic day in and day out?
You cut briefly, but I got the question. The
Okay.
most stressful part is emails. It's
Emails.
crazy. Yes, how many emails one gets? Like,
Oh my
again,
goodness.
being an academic is like being a startup CEO without a lot of support. In that you have to solve things from lab renovations to, like enrollment of students in your class. So emails. If I could, I would. I mean, I don't know who invented emails, but that's like I suffer because of my emails, my
Oh
inbox.
my gosh. Well, I love your signature card. It says, it's a link to something that says why my emails are 5 sentences or less. And I really like that. I really like that. That was wonderful. So I got you. Emails. Okay. What is the most exciting part of being an academic day in and day out?
It's really building a team and working with my team towards a specific goal and working with people that I like. That's super important. That's super important. That we're handpicked, and I don't have kids, but I think that maybe that's what parenting should be like. Maybe like I love all of them in very different ways. It's
Mm.
very weird because I really like every one of them in extremely different ways for different reasons. It's super cool to see that.
That is super cool. Okay, next question. What advice do you have for anyone who is looking to get started learning about quantum biology or even participate in the field of quantum biology?
Okay, so advice number one is to keep open, to keep open to connecting different things. It doesn't pertain only to quantum biology, but like anything in life, right? So choose, know what you like to do and try to connect what you like to do to your day job somehow. Um, the other advice for quantum biology specifically is reading a small book called Life on the Edge. So it's a layman's book that actually describes the different flavors of quantum biology.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Next question. What is the most meaningful way for students and academics to help each other?
It's support minoritized groups, maybe,
Mm.
right? Um, to realize that minorities, all types of minorities, socioeconomic minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities, that they have it hard, right? And being aware that your experience might not be the experience of everyone, and being mindful that there are people, who. Okay, so first of all, I would say, let me rephrase my answer. For the people who are not minorities, I would advise you to just be aware that minoritized students might have a very different um, experience than yours in academia during your studies. And for minority students, I would say that you should remember that you don't have to do it alone, in the sense that please remember that there's tons of people like you who belong in academia, who should be there. If you're not getting credit, if you're not, go find your tribe, go find someone, go find a research group, go find a university who values what you bring to the table.
Definitely. Definitely. I think that's great advice. And it gets confusing out there for people going through those early years in their academics. And we all have a little feeling of being lost from time to time. So I think that's wonderful advice. And you sharing your story only furthers that, help for people. So next question is a big question. What is your biggest hope to accomplish during your time on Earth? I think we may have just spent the entire time talking about it.
Yes, I think so too. So, what I want, besides doing those high-tech quantum experiments for biological matter, I want to bring quantum bio to the mainstream. So right now, there is no incentive for young blood to work on quantum bio, right? So many people pivot to doing quantum bio experiments in the second half, last third of their career, when they're established, when they have a steady source of income.
Mm.
So there's no incentive for like early career researchers like me, like my group, to enter this field at all. There are no standard calls. There's like maybe some foundations that give patches of funding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that part of my goal in life, besides my own research, is to bring quantum bio to the mainstream. If we want, like, I really think like quantum bio is today where quantum computing was 30 years ago,
Wow.
right? 30 years ago, first experiments, there was a lot of theory, and first experiments were starting to be performed. I think we're there now for quantum bio, so that maybe in 30 years we can have a quantum bio industry. We can have a quantum bio, department, quantum bio department. Say bioinformatics departments weren't a thing 20 years ago, and now they're here. So maybe what should we be doing now so that we have quantum bio departments in 25 years, so that we have, standard calls for proposals for quantum bio in 25 years. So that's something that I'm very interested in developing, like this long view on how to make a science mainstream, make a science fundable, make a science field healthy and self-sustained.
Definitely. Definitely. That is very, again, admirable. And you have a contagious energy about you when you speak on this. So you are the person for this. And I'm super excited to see everything that you're able to accomplish. Again, you got a new #1 fan. Where can people follow the work you are doing and learn more about you?
Okay, so I'll point you to our Twitter handles. My personal Twitter is at Clarice Aiello. So that's Clarice, D as in Delta, Aiello, Aiello. And we tweet from qubit_lab. We are the quantum biology tech, or qubit. It's a pun on quantum bits. And yeah, and that's where we are right now.
Wonderful. Well, go give her a follow. Clarice, thank you so, so much for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure talking to you, and thanks for humoring me.